I've been doing this the last 2.5 years, and I'm leaving Missoula the next week to take over all of the internment camps in the United States. If you don't know me, I'm Nick Collier, and I'm the Chief of Detention and Reporting Section of this here camp. Right now we have over 1,000. As of July 4th, 1943, we have over 1,000 Italians and only 40 Japanese. But things were different a year ago. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got here, and so we all know the background. Many of you are aware of it already, but just bear with me. When Germany attacked Poland in 1939, England declared war against Germany and Italy. The German and Italian governments told the cruise ships and the ships that they had out in neutral ports, and the United States was neutral at that time, to stay where they were. Well, they did for about a year, and things got boring, I guess. But a bunch of them started to destroy their ships. Well, President Roosevelt said they were doing that because their governments told them to. So he went to the German and the Italian ambassadors and said, y'all got to stop doing that. And they said, well, we're not doing it. We're just afraid you're going to give those ships to the Great Britons. And that's exactly what happened later on. But in that time, we took over those ships and sent the Italians to Ellis Island in New York. And then they were shipped here. And today they remain here. Now, we treat people here very, very well. This is maybe the best camp, well, I believe it is the best camp of all the internment camps. We are unique in that we have Italians. These Italians we have are musicians, and they all came from a cruise ship. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them came from a cruise ship. So they're musicians, and we have chefs. They eat like better than y'all do. One of my border guards told me that, by the way, we're not FBI or anything. We belong to Immigration Services. That's what runs this camp. Defense Department or Department of War wanted no part of it, so we took it over. But the Italians here have the self-government. It's the smartest thing I ever did. I got them to have their own mayor, their own chief of police, their own everything. And they run their government. So the only thing I do is the security. I make sure they stay here. We've never had an escape or attempted escape from this camp. And I'm very proud of that. But again, the Italians are very good cooks and very, very good musicians. In fact, you all have been maybe to one of their concerts. They've every Sunday now, or every other Sunday, I guess, have a concert at the recreation center here that you're all invited to. And as you know, 10% of the take of how much money they bring in goes to the Iron Lung Association for you all in Missoula. So it's a worthy cause, and you all can see them. You also know that the Italians are down visiting you and working in your town. There has been rumors of, this is a little embarrassing to talk about, that women folk from Missoula are becoming involved with some of my Italians that are working down at the hospital or at the hotel. I've been asked to do something about that, but I'm at a loss to figure out what I can do. I think we just have to show constraint would be the best thing. Now the Italians have something, they have a few quirks about them that I want to just talk to you a little bit about. We got Oxford shoes. We only got enough Oxford shoes for about 20 of the Italians. The Italians, when they see one person has something, everybody has to have it. So they all wanted Oxford shoes. And they didn't just want Oxford shoes, but they wanted the same kind of black, whatever, Oxford shoes. Well, we couldn't get it for them. But my favorite was, they learned that some of the people that were diabetic were getting special food. So all of a sudden we had an outbreak of diabetes. Now they were less likely to want to be that when they got to the doctor and learned they had to have a shot every day. But we did have an outbreak. Now, December 7th, 1941 was the darkest day in American history. And on that day, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, America was afraid. And we had every right to be, as you know. There was darkness all around us. We knew the Japanese had submarines off the coast of California, and submarines off the coast of Washington and Oregon. We knew that the Japanese were on the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. The Japanese even had tried to put hot air balloons launched from Japan to fly over the western part of the United States, including us here, with bombs on them. And there was a huge population of Japanese Americans in Hawaii, particularly, and California. They, starting on December 7th, were told, there was a knock on the door or there was a poster put out, and they were told they had 24 hours to gather what they had, and they were sent to camps. Now, this camp was an interrogation center. I said was because it only went from in the 1940s to 42s, and it's now over. But it was not very well liked by the Japanese because of that being an interrogation center. The Japanese were feared, and you have to understand, you all do understand, I hope, that because of the fear, we had nothing else we could do but bring them here, or bring them to camps in California desert or Nevada or Fort Sill, Oklahoma. The Sons of the Golden West, that despicable organization, you have to also understand that the Japanese were discriminated against long before December 7th, 1941. There was a thing called the Yellow Peril of rumors that the Japs had a stronger or a larger birth rate than the white people did, and were going to take over the white race, and that they were better business people. So organizations like Sons of the Golden West tried to get them deported. And a lot of the Japanese, most of the Japanese, continued to have a relationship with somebody in Japan because frankly they were concerned they were going to get deported. During the interrogation here, what happens is there are 3 men from each state, western state. You all might remember or know Mike Mansfield. He's one of the members of the group here, of the council. The Montana Council is working very, very hard because they're taking the overflow from California and Oregon. We use Korean interpreters. I fought that because the Japanese and the Koreans don't get along very well. And so I was never sure, especially with the older people that came here, the older Japanese, that our interrogators were getting the right answers. But I don't speak Japanese and I don't speak Korean, so I just had to take their word for it. The average age of the men sent here was 60 years old. The first group that came here. They were retired or old businessmen. They had lived here all their lives. Some had sons in the army. We lost one the first day. He died. To talk a little bit about why the Japanese were so feared and why the Germans were not sent to camp, and the only Italians really that were at camp were here. The Japanese, and by their culture, felt a very strong brotherhood with the Japanese in Japan. They didn't necessarily agree with their politics, but they did subscribe to the magazines because it was custom, it was something to do. So when they were interrogated here, and they were asked if they had any affiliation with the Japanese government, they all did, or most of them, because of their desire to continue with the Japanese culture. We've got some miners in, excuse me. We got some miners in from Nevada, Japanese. And we discovered that they were paying 50 cents a month to the War Orphans Society, quotes, in Japan. Well, we confronted these miners with that fact, and they said they didn't have a clue where that money was going. And I believe them. But they were kept here, and they remain here, and they are happier here than they were in the mine, as so they said. The older Japanese also, they are bored like the Italians. There is very little for them to do. We have had many, many problems, with psychological problems with people in this camp that are stir crazy. I don't know of any better way of saying it. They are bored. They don't know what to do. You all, if you went into the barracks over there, saw somebody built a gondola, and some of the Italians. They play soccer. They do art. You've all seen it. They do music, as I've talked about. But they still are in a cage, and it is very difficult for them. This is the best run camp of all the internment camps in the United States. But things like no Japs, no Japs, no Japs in the Missoulian is not something that is very constructive to what we're trying to do here. I've been very grateful to you all from Missoula in the way you helped us by your encouragement to the Italians that are working downtown, and your perseverance through our having all of these people here in your midst. I know it's difficult, and I know that you all have fears that I share with you about the Japs being here. The governor of Montana has told us, the federal government, that he will have no Japanese remain here after the war. I don't know if he can do that or not, but that's what they said. If I have any questions, gotta be something. Happy to talk.
Mr. Collier, tell us how you feel about the effectiveness of these camps in fighting the war effort? Is it working? Does it help?
I believe there's a couple answers to that. I think the morale of soldiers that are from states that had a large population of Japanese feel better about the Japanese being interned because they're not in the same place as their families. Does it have a direct effect on the war? I don't believe it does. I find the Japanese to be very noble people. I'm not entirely in agreement, and I have said this publicly, with our policy towards the Japanese. I know of a soldier whose father was in a Japanese internment camp and won the United States Congressional Medal of Honor. So I'm not sure it is doing anything effectively except making people feel better about themselves and not being afraid.
Do you know, Mr. Collier, why the U.S. government made a decision to not lock up Japanese Americans in Hawaii? Why are they allowed out?
Because of the Japanese, the yellow peril. There was more to sending them here and to internment camps than just Pearl Harbor. There was a great deal of prejudice against the Japanese, as I've talked about before that. They were the answer. The official answer is that they were concerned about espionage, that they were become spies, that even interned in the state they needed to be watched, and their families couldn't stay there. They just wanted them out, and that whole discussion must have been taking place long before the war started, because it was so effective. It began the day Pearl Harbor hit.
Do you have any suspicions that the government knew about Pearl Harbor, Mr. Collier?
No, I don't have any suspicions of that.
And one more question. I noticed that you talked a little bit about the Italians and the fact that this is one of the few places that Italians were interned. And in doing a little digging, our class found out that there were many Italians interned in Northern California who were fishermen and farmers as well. Did they tell you anything about that here, Mr. Collier?
No.
You didn't know about that here?
No, I knew they were there. They were also, like the Italians we have here, they were coming from a source kind of outside the United States or close to the border. Again, there was concern that they were going to be espionage agents. So this wasn't the only place with Italians, but I believe we had the largest population of Italians anywhere.
That's what I heard.
Has baseball been a big part here?
We don't, the Japanese during this period of time don't know anything about baseball. Maybe in the future. Any other questions?
We saw some photos, Mr. Wellard, about baseball over there in the other site that we just visited. And I'm wondering if maybe it was the Japanese, because the Japanese were older men, weren't they? So it would have been tough for them to run the bases. But I'm wondering if maybe the Italians played a little bit of baseball here too, or something. Somebody was playing.
They played soccer.
Soccer players, guys.
In fact, there was a professional soccer team on the Conte Bianco, which was the cruise ship that about 400 of the Italians came here from that ship, and there was a professional soccer team on it, and they played every Sunday, and the professional soccer team used to beat the heck out of the team they would find with all the rest of the people. That was the sport every Sunday. Any other questions? Sir?
Personally, do you find internment camps necessary?
I find them a reality. That's kind of a political answer to that, isn't it? Yes, I think so. I think that if if the Japanese were allowed to stay in Hawaii and California and on the coast, there would be such great fear, and they would be treated even much, much worse, I believe, by the population than they are being treated in the camps. And the camps are nothing to be proud of, frankly. But if they were allowed to live in their homes, they may have lived there a long time, but the fear of the white population would be very, very strong. And I think maybe for the wrong reason, but in my opinion, they're better off in the camp than they would be living in their state or where they live. Yes, sir.
After the war, were the camps immediately disbanded, or did it take some time?
Actually, the camps, I'm going to become Michael Wellert now. I'm going to drop the thing, and I'm going to talk about a couple things. One, Nick Colaire was, I just found out, was made the internment camp superintendent for the internment camps that we ran in Japan. Actually, by the end of the war, almost all the internment camps were shut down, dissolved. There was great fear that there was great fear about the Japanese period. That they seemed to be very industrious. They seemed to be very, very good businessmen. They were very successful, so there was envy. And there was also a fear in the western states that they would gather in big populations and be a threat to the white race, frankly. And somebody asked about baseball. General McCarthy, when he was in Japan after the war, was like governor, I'm not sure the right title for him, but was the chief of everything there. He ran that country basically, and he showed them how to play baseball, and they liked it so much, as you know, it's their national sport now today. Have any other questions? Yes.
I may have missed it from the beginning, but where did the women and children go?
The Japanese women and children went to other camps, and they were not considered threats, but, well, they were considered threats to stay living there, but living in where they were in Hawaii or on the coast, but they were not considered really war threats. It was more of a fact that the men folk were the enemy. So, but they were sent to other camps. And one of the decisions that was made here at Fort Missoula was if the man, after his interrogation, was sent to one of those camps with his family, kept here or released totally. And if he was released totally, his family, I believe, joined him. That didn't happen very often.
We know from the novel we read that the father in our novel came here and then eventually joined his family at Tule Lake.
Right.
But he was out of the Seattle area, and he was a community leader. And it's a fictional novel based on fact.
Yes, I read it.
But he was here. You did read it?
I read
Oh,
it.
good. Okay.
And you're right. And what's interesting is Tule Lake was possibly the most infamous of all the camps.
Yeah.
There were constant hunger strikes and other kind of strikes by the Japanese that were stationed, or not stationed there, interned there, on lots and lots of problems. One of the reasons Nick Colaire got promoted to this position was because people tried to figure out why this camp never had trouble. Well, one, in fairness to the other camps, the Japanese just came here for the interrogation, most of them. There were some that stayed here. But the other people, the other camps really had lots of problems with other things that we didn't have here, and so they were trying to figure out why this camp was so successful. And I believe because Nick Colaire was smart enough to have them self-govern. There's a very, I think, funny story, I hope you think so too, about the mayor, the Japanese mayor. They had mayors, they had their mayor and their chief of police and all this other stuff. And a government official came here from Washington and went to see the government, or wanted to see the mayor, the Japanese mayor, and he was told by the Japanese, well, he's on vacation. And the official says, well, I don't understand. Well, the Japanese had built a golf course out here. And he was playing golf. And the Japanese said, you can't bother him. He's worked very hard for 6 months. He's on vacation. So the official went out and saw the Japanese guy and decided that, yes, he was on vacation. There are actually 2 instances of discontent in this camp, and I'll tell you those, and then if I don't have any questions, we'll wrap it up. But the one was when a newspaper man from, or not a newspaper man, a guy that owned a restaurant in New York, an Italian, moved back to Italy and told the Italian press that Fort Missoula was the dregs of the earth, that the guards were the lowest of the criminal people in the United States, and they were, and worse, they were Jews. So this kind of hit the Italian papers, and then it hit the American papers. And we had, or they had visitors here from the New York Times and everything else, and discovered there was self-governed and there wasn't anything else to do it. The other issue was because Nick Collier made a decision and was kind of forced into it, there was a whole lot of surplus of beef suet in the camp. Not in the camp, but in Montana. And the Italians who ate very, very well here, I mean, really did, much better than the people from Missoula, that lived in Missoula at that time, used olive oil on everything. And so Nick decided that he was going to change and use this beef suet. Well, they took one bite of it, went into the kitchen and beat the cook over the head with the beef suet. So that ended that little instance, or that little experiment. Do I have any other questions?
Only extra virgin olive oil, right?
Yeah.
Who were the security guards? Were they locals? Were they people from the government?
Locals were mainly hired in the machine shops and that sort of thing. The guards themselves were, like I said, immigration people, and many were career immigration people. So they lived here during that period of time. It must have been very difficult for the people of Missoula when the Japanese came, because Missoula, if you imagine, was, as you can imagine, was much smaller, and there was darkness all around them. And there was all of a sudden this camp with lights and everything else with 1,000 Japanese living in it who had attacked in Pearl Harbor and things. You really have to understand why they were afraid, why they feared the Japanese, because the Japanese just attacked us. There are 2 sides to it. The United States did apologize to the Japanese interns in 1976. There was a government, Congress passed a law apologizing to the Japanese. But I had somebody come to one of these lectures who was in Bataan, was an American soldier in Bataan, and he said, they never apologized to me. So there's 2 sides to it. In my opinion, it was kind of, it was an experiment that had to happen because of the fear, and that the Japanese were better off in the camp, because if they stayed where they lived, there were lynchings in the Midwest from Germans and things like that, and it would have got very bad, very, very bad for them. Any other questions?
Well, but I have a question that doesn't pertain to them, filming. Is that all right? I wanted to see if you would be willing to come to our classroom and maybe work with us a little on our evening in Missoula that we're trying to put together.
I would love to.
And maybe we could talk a little bit about the entertainment that they put on for themselves. We saw some photos over in the other spot,
Right.
Where gentlemen dressed up as ladies and entertained the troops, so to speak. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, what you know about it.
Yeah, Yeah, you pretty much know what I know, other than the fact that they were very, very proficient at what they did. They had musicians here that were world-class musicians. And you're right, they put on American. What's interesting is the Japanese put on English plays. There's a picture yeah, they did Shakespeare. You would think the Japanese, as cultural as they were, would have been doing kabuki or something like that, but they didn't. They did American plays, which I find fascinating. I don't know why, but I
Just
do.
terrific.
Any other questions? I look very much forward to working with you on your Book Night in Missoula stuff. I have a good background in theater, and I really love Reader's Theater, and so I'm excited about that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.